In this video, we are going to talk about grading. There are 4 different ways that you can grade within Schoology. 3 of those are actually housed in your Add Materials dropdown. One of them is Add Assignment, the other is Add Test or Quiz, and then the third one from your materials is Add a Discussion. Whenever you pick one of these 3, it will create a grading column in your grade book for you. That way, when you grade either the assignment that's been submitted, when the test or quiz gets graded, or if you choose to have a graded discussion, once you award that student points for those 3 areas, it will actually show up in the grade book for you. You won't have to add that manually into the grade book. And then the 4th way that you can grade within Schoology is if you go to the grade book and you hit the plus sign over here to the right, you will see from those, just like in the material types, you had that add assignment, add test quiz, or add a discussion, but additionally you have add grade column. Now, I like to suggest that you stick to these add assignment, add test quiz, or add discussion. And the reason being is, unless your courses are linked, and we'll talk about linked courses in the Schoology Advanced class, but unless your courses are linked, if you were to choose this add grade column, it actually does not give you a due date option. And that's problematic because since we are linking Schoology to eSchool, if you don't have a due date, that grade isn't going to actually calculate into the overall grade for your course until the end of the marking period. So if the end of the marking period were December 22nd and it is November 1st, you will actually not see this grade from the add grade column calculated into the grade in eSchool until 12/22 were to hit. Add assignment works just like the add a grade column. However, it gives you the ability to add a due date. And having that due date will then, the grade will calculate based on that due date for both Schoology and eSchool. The other thing, if you choose add assignment, add test, or add discussion, it will show up in not only your gradebook, but it will be listed here in the materials folders. It's important to keep those published if you want your students to be able to see their grade when they're viewing them. But depending on how you organize your class, you may have those that maybe they're assignments that a student doesn't need to submit anything, but you graded. You may keep those organized maybe a little bit differently in your foldering system. All Schoology users, most of them, I shouldn't say all, but most of them have a student information system that they are linking to. For us, it is the eSchool Plus student information system. Other districts may be using something like Skyward or PowerSchool, but we use the eSchool Plus, which happens to be owned by PowerSchool as well. And so before we can even get started with any of these grading options, the first thing that we want to make sure that we are doing is setting up our gradebook in eSchool. And that's going to help us for the second piece of making sure our Schoology gradebook is set up and ready to go for these graded materials that we're choosing to do. Now, to set up your gradebook in eSchool, you're going to want to go to your Teacher Access Center and decide what categories you want. Are you weighting? Are you calculating by total points? All of those decisions need to be made in eSchool. The other thing you need to decide is what your grading scale is going to be. Are you going to use the West Aurora School District plus minus grading scale? Are you going to use just the generic numeric or standard scale? That's up to you to decide. It's up to you to decide if you're weighting your categories or if you are going to calculate by total points. One thing that you will need to do when you are setting up your eSchool gradebook is to make sure that you are excluding missing assignments from calculating against a student's grade. And the reason for that is when we dig a little bit deeper into the Schoology gradebook, you are going to notice that Schoology does not calculate missing assignments against the student. So if you wanted to calculate against them, you would actually need to physically enter a 0. And so by setting that up in eSchool that way, it makes sure that both gradebooks are calculating the same. Once you have your eSchool gradebook set up, you are going to want to come down here to this eSchool Plus link to the left. This is what links our two gradebooks together and allows them to communicate to each other. Now, you'll see this is saying access denied for me because this course doesn't have a gradebook attached to it in eSchool. So I am going to go to another course here. I'm just going to randomly just pick a teacher's name who came to my mind. And if I select one of their courses, I'm just going to enroll in it so that I can see the options. On the left-hand side, when I click on that eSchool Plus, it now takes me to my sync and configuration pages. By clicking on configuration, it will list all of the categories that are available in eSchool. And because you set up your eSchool gradebook first, the categories that you chose in eSchool will actually have a line that goes across here, letting you know that that is one that is being used. If you're not seeing these lines going across for certain categories, then you need to go back into eSchool and make sure that is set up first. Once you are here in this drop down next to the line that you see going across, you're going to make one of two choices. One is create a new Schoology category. That means it doesn't already exist here in the drop down. If you are seeing a list of categories listed here, though, you're going to match it to the one that's on the left. So because assignments already exist, I'm going to choose assignments. If assignments had not existed and I needed for that to be created in this dropdown, then I would hit create new Schoology category. Once I do that for all of the categories that I am using in eSchool, I'm simply going to go to the bottom and hit Save Configuration. Now, before I leave this page, it'll be important to make sure that you see this green bar going across that says your category configurations have been saved. Okay. Now that that is done, and I know that I have categories set up in Schoology, I can go over to the gradebook setup here on the left. And now I will see a list of the categories that I am going to be using in this course. In this instance, the categories are weighted, so you can see assessment is worth 65, assignments worth 20, classwork is 0, and then final exam 15. If I had been calculating by total points, this weights category would be unchecked, and you would not see these breakdowns here. Everything would be even. The gradebook scale is where I'm going to choose which grading scale that I would like to use. We have the numeric. A lot of people use the SD 129 plus or minus scale, so you can make that determination. If you are going to use a plus or minus, please make sure it is the SD 129 one and not just this Schoology A plus minus scale. This one down here is the one that will match the grading scales that are set up in eSchool. Okay. You have the ability to round the final grades. So if you would like those rounded up, you would make sure that this is checked. And then you have some additional grading options down here below. So we're going to talk about those a little bit. So the course override column, by clicking that, you're going to notice in your gradebook you have two columns. One is overall course grade. The other one is the marking period grade. If you were to choose course override column, that's going to give you a column to override the calculated grade. If you want to hide the grading category score columns, you can choose to hide that. Schoology will display by category how the student is doing if you would like. And then you have the ability, the grading period override columns, if you need to override the overall marking period column, you can do that. And if you would like to see a total points column, which is going to show you the student received 423 points out of a possible 650 points, you can choose to enable that and view that. Some visibility settings, you can hide the overall grade in the student's grade report. Doing that, then when the student is looking at their course grade, they will not see how they are doing overall. You can hide the grading period grades in the student grade report. So if you don't want them to see quarter one, quarter two, you would have the ability to hide that. Again, these are ones that I don't necessarily recommend because it doesn't then allow the student to see how they are truly doing, or the parents to see how their students are doing. And then high total points achieved in student grade report, you have the ability to hide that as well. On the right-hand side, you will see here, we can do a couple of things. So you'll see a star listed next to each of the grading scales. The one that has the star highlighted, so if I wanted, I could make this SD 129 scale highlighted. That is going to set that grading scale as my default, so I don't have to select it each time. I can do that same thing with categories. If there's a specific category that I'm typically using and I want that to be my default so that I'm not having to select it each time, but rather only select it if I'm using something different than that one that I commonly use, I could actually click assessment here, for example, and that will then default as my category when I am creating a graded item in my Schoology course. Also here, if we go back over to the right-hand side here, you have the ability to do rubrics. And so if I click on rubrics, it's going to give me the ability to add a rubric. And we'll talk a little bit more about rubrics later, but just know that that is where the rubrics for your course are housed, and how you will create them will be here as well. Say you are teaching multiple courses and you would like to copy your grading setups from one course to another. You have this copy settings option. It will not copy over your eSchool configuration, so that's something that you will still have to come in here and do, but it will at least copy this page worth of information over for you. Okay, once this is set up exactly how you want, then we can start to actually add things from our materials and gradebook so that we can start grading work. So I'm going to jump over to materials. And actually, I'm going to go back to that previous course that I was using. And I'll go back to my materials. Okay. So I'm just going to choose add assignment. I'll go through each of the grading options that you have for the graded materials and show you how they work. So I'm going to do add an assignment. Now, we talked about add an assignment earlier when it came to using the file and link options, but you do also have the ability here to do an audio video recording attachment or attach from an external tool if you needed to. So I'm going to give this a name. And I'm going to say parents homework 1. Remember, the nice thing about creating an assignment versus like when we were just adding a link is that you can give instructions here in this text box. You also learn this is where you can insert content. If you needed to embed content, you could do that from here. So I'm just going to say, please turn in your PowerPoint presentation that you were working on this week. Here, I'm going to give it a due date. Remember, due dates are how, when this assignment goes from Schoology over to eSchool, it's how it knows in eSchool when to include that as part of the grade. So I'm going to make the due date the 19th of December. I'm going to pick a category. Now, in this course, I only have the test category. If I wanted to create a new category, maybe this is going to be a category that I don't really care if it's moving over from Schoology to eSchool, then I can hit create new category and give it a name. But if I want to make sure that my 2 grade books are matching, I'm going to want to pick a category that I have set here from the drop down. That way I know it's going to sync over from Schoology to eSchool. So I'm going to choose my test category. I can expand this grading options if I choose to. That's just going to give me, it's going to show me what marking period it's attached to, a factor of 1. So by default, anything in my test category is going to have the same weight as any other test in that category. If I'm doing calculate by total points, then no matter what, all of my assignments are going to be weighted the same regardless. But this is not your category weight. Remember, that was determined in your grade setup. This is just how much this particular assignment is weighed within the category that you have here. So if all of your tests are weighed the same, then you want to leave this as a 1. If this particular test is going to be worth more, have a heavier weight than the other tests in this category, you might change this. Otherwise, you can leave that at a 1. Making it a 0 is not going to be factored into the student's grade at all. Here is my default grading scale, but again, if I wanted to change that, I could select a different one for just maybe this assignment. Or if I wanted to use a rubric, I could actually create a rubric from scratch right here for the assignment. Some other options you have when it comes to grading is you can differentiate your instruction. So you have the ability here to click individually assign. When I do that, it's going to allow me to either type in a student's name, or if I had created a grading book, something that we'll talk about a little bit later, you will be able then to choose that grading book name from here. I'm just going to choose Chief Blackhawk. So because I chose his name, Chief Blackhawk will be the only person who actually sees this assignment under their materials, and he's the only one in the class it will be graded for. If I don't want that and I want it for the entire class, simply not including this individually assigned, we'll disable that. You can align learning objectives if you want. So if you are using the mastery tab against something we will talk about later, you can align a learning objective. You can lock this, which means nobody will be able to see it. One thing to pay attention to is this next icon, which is submissions enabled. If you have submissions enabled, clicking, by default, it will be enabled. So if a student doesn't submit something electronically, it will say it's overdue. If you don't care whether they submit it electronically and you're perfectly okay with them turning it in by hand, you may want to either leave this on so ones can submit electronically, or if you don't want them to, make sure that that's turned off so they don't get that overdue status if they had not turned it in electronically and you had not graded it yet. Here's that publish to students icon again. Remember, green is published, unchecked is unpublished. If you want to see grade statistics, you can enable that. If you want comments enabled, you can choose to enable or disable. And then if you wanted to copy this to another course, you could do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit create. And because I didn't add it to a folder, it's just here at the bottom, but I could have added it to a folder if I wanted. If I go to my grade book now, because I said that was a graded item and we attached it to a category, you'll see here, it's now appeared in my grade book for me to grade this assignment. Now, if my students had submitted something electronically, I would be able to go to their submission, and then I would be able to grade their submission, and that grade would appear here then for me. The other graded material option that we have is the add discussion. So here I can say this is a video presentation discussion. I could embed content. I'm going to embed a YouTube video. And I'm going to just search my name and pull one up. So I'm going to be doing this part 1, courses, groups, and resources that you've already seen. I'm going to import as embedded. Anytime I see this yellow bar, it means I'm good to go. I'm going to give this a due date of the 19th. I'm going to say enable grading. Now that I've enabled grading, when a student comments, I'm going to choose my test category because it's the only one I have in this course. Again, I have those other options to individually assign, align learning objectives. I can lock it, publish it, allow other members to see responses before participating, or they must respond to the discussion before they can see anybody else in their class who's just responded. And then I have my copy to courses. So I'm going to hit create. Now when a student submits a post on the discussion, it will give me the ability to grade that. Once graded, so you'll see all of the users here that have submitted something, and then it will give me the option to the right of that to grade it. Once graded, that grade will then appear for me here in my grade book, and you'll see it already has the column listed for me. So it knows that it's graded since I chose graded. And then the last one here under materials is that add test or quiz option. So I can give this test or quiz a name. I'm going to say reviewing media albums. Give it a due date. I'm going to say the 19th. The category, I'm going to choose test. I have my grading options again here. Okay, it's worth 100 points. I can make this worth 10 points if I wanted. Here's my grading scale. I can individually assign this again, publish it, enable grading statistics, enable or disable comments, and I can copy it to another course. Okay, and I'm going to hit create. Now, as the students, it'll take you actually to create your questions, and we'll talk about that later. But as students respond to the questions, it will automatically grade them. It will grade every question type except for the short answer essay question. So if you're using that short answer essay question, it will need you to grade that short answer essay question. Otherwise, it will, if you're using any of the other ones, it will grade all the other question types for you. If you did include the short answer, it will grade the other types, and then it'll wait to calculate an overall grade for the assignment or the test or quiz until the short answer essay question is answered. Again, if we go to our grade book, you will see here is my test or quiz called Reviewing Media Albums. And so once graded, it will automatically put that grade in for me.